Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. This one here is a voiced process video explaining how I created this piece. Now if you want to see more videos like this, you can head on over to my Patreon, as that is where I upload all my content, all the latest tutorials, releases, files, brushes, as well as other exclusive content as well. You'll find a link in the descriptions. So I already have a grayscale sketch of this piece, of the composition that I roughly want to work with. And I've got all the layers intact, and that will come in handy later on as I start to apply color and detail. So we're going to start off with quickly adding in some flat colors, and we're going to take advantage of those layers that we had beforehand, get behind those layers, start quickly adding in some flat colors. For the sky, I've added a 3 color gradient, but everything else will be using clipping masks or alpha lock on Procreate or pixel lock on Photoshop to just block in those flat colors. Now obviously the theme here I want is to be a fiery piece, so things are going to be quite warm here. And I'm just going to be essentially getting in some nice values in there in the colors that I initially had. So obviously here you see I'm starting to add in some blues. I'm just experimenting at this point with the blues, having a bit of a contrast, but having cool versus the warm color, because I felt it might have been too red. And then eventually I was quite happy with how the blue turned out here. So I decided to stick with it. And just to find a balance in this, I'm going to add in some greens into the midground back there, and that's just going to break up some of the reds and the blues. So as you can see here, I'm using contrasting colors, I'm using strong blues and strong reds, and the green is there to just break it up a little bit. It's not as prominent as the blues and the reds, right? And one of the main reasons why I've chosen this particular blue is because in the more well-known Naja story, he typically has a lot of fighting in the underwater kingdom. So I wanted to kind of signify that part of it, and the water, hence why the water in the foreground there. And I want to use that as a design element to frame the artwork as well, and the clouds will do the same job. So right now I'm still on the sketching phase, but I'm adding a little bit more values and dimension into each element. So I'm adding an extra tone for the shadows in the water, and an extra tone for the highlights of the water. And I'm doing the same thing with the with Naja's ribbons at the moment, ribbons or cloth, and just loosely playing around with some extra elements that I could add in later on. So this can be some of the flame and the flares from the flames, some little bit of dust, all that kind of stuff. But it's still super simple right now. I'm keeping it to a separate layer so I can come back and probably rework it or get rid of it and start a new one and refine it a bit more. So obviously with Naja being our centerpiece here, our selling point, which I also mentioned, our focal point, I will be spending a lot more time on the character here as opposed to the environment. Now you'll see I'll still be working on the environment here and there, but my main focus here is Naja, the character himself. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time crafting this character, molding it, refining the edges, getting his proportions right, and I will be doing this for quite some time. Now, if you've seen my previous videos, you'll notice that I always talk about shapes, and shapes. This is no different for the character I'm working on at the moment, especially with the light source coming from the back. He will be backlit, meaning that it'll be quite dark in the front. So I want to be keeping him, focusing on the silhouette of the character, and making sure that the silhouette itself is strong. You'll see me detailing the character here, but you won't be able to see much. So like I said before, I'm still working on the character because he's the focal point. you want to put a lot of focus on it. Make sure that the character's pose is standing strong, it's standing right, and make sure that you've got the silhouette all down packed before you move on to creating any more details. Because if you've created all those details and you find out later that, you know, the pose or the proportions aren't right, or the form isn't right, you're going to have a lot of trouble coming back to it. Unless, of course, you have, you know, another dedicated layer just for detailing. But usually, if you know, spend too much time on something and you come back to refix it, it can be quite tricky. So make sure to have all that sorted early on, and everything can be more stress-free later on. So whether it be you're creating fan art, whether you'll be creating your original art, it's always good to have a story, even if it's just a simple sentence. It's always good to have a story that you can refer back to, so it can remind you of the energy or the thought or the feeling that you had initially when you were starting. So when you come back to it, you can get reminded of it. So what is your story? Obviously the story I have here is based off the Nirja story. So all the weaponry, you know, the elements, it's all related to Nirja's power or his story. You know, it all relates to him in some way. Even for the eyes here, I've got it quite loosely, quite, you know, looking quite angry, because he was quite that character. You see, he was quite a mischievous character, and he was always causing trouble. So, and he's also known as, you know, like a demon. So obviously having that helps me identify the type of personality that he might have. So I'm just working and refining those ribbons at the moment, fixing the edges, molding the shape, recreating some of the shapes and edges, and getting in those values like I mentioned with what I did with the water. We're just adding in those extra values, some shadows, and keeping to that initial bright red for the light. And just kind of, fixing it up at the moment and refining it. So I want to be talking just briefly about design and framing your focal point. So with my main character being in the center here, all the elements that I design and create will eventually lead the eye towards my centerpiece. Look at the clouds, look at the ribbons, look at the way the water is working. It all focuses and leads you towards my centerpiece right here. Even the sunset glow in the background there is playing a part, as it illuminates the strongest in the middle, and that will basically lead your eye to your character here. So it's really important to think about these type of things when you're designing your piece, especially in the early stages of, when you're sketching. And these will all play an important part towards your final design in the end. So when I say don't put too much detail into your secondary elements, I don't mean just keeping it flat. I'm meaning basically sometimes less is more. More so in the case when something's far away and you're trying to emphasize something is far away in the distance. You want to put a little bit more less detail into it. Like I always say, something the further something is away and the smaller it is, the less detail you're going to get and the less our eye is going to be able to perceive. when you're trying to make it atmospheric and you start adding in fog and, atmosphere, mist, all that kind of stuff, you will be eliminating a lot of the detail anyways. So keep it simple on some of the things that you're trying to emphasize. That's basically the key to creating something that, creating depth, trying to push something far. So adding a little bit less can be a good thing. So right now I'm just going through that layer of buildings over there, and I'm just defining the silhouette. Because even if you have less detail, you still want your silhouette to be identifiable and strong. You want to be able to look at it and be like, okay, cool, that those are buildings, and you want to find that nice balance and that sweet spot, and helping your viewers identify that. So thinking about the culture of your concept, obviously my one is based in China, so you can see a lot of the buildings that I'm creating right now are identifiable as somewhat, Chinese buildings from back in the day. And in terms of how to know how much to put in, look at the silhouette of some buildings that you're trying to create, in terms of the culture. Have a look at what makes it identifiable as a different cultural building or monument. So in terms of what I'm trying to create here, it's obviously the roof, and that's like the dead giveaway to explaining what culture this might be. So let's just have a look at the ribbons that I'm creating at the moment and the clouds. We're going to be breaking lines and shapes to loosen up the artwork a little bit and the elements within it. So let's start off with looking at the ribbons. See, I've got like loose brush strokes coming out from the ribbons. I like to keep these things loose just to create some artistic element of movement. Because the ribbons themselves are quite fast. I wanted to really emphasize that by adding in some of the loose brush strokes there to show that it's moving. Same with the clouds here. I've broken up the clouds a lot. You can see little bits scattering from around it. You can see loose brush strokes, and that gives off a very nice painterly energy. And I love doing that for a lot of my artworks because it just kind of breathes a lot of life into the elements and the artwork itself. Sometimes when you have everything too perfect and you have some of the edges too perfect, it can look quite stiff. So the key to creating something with a lot of movement in it is to keep it loose. Keep your brush strokes loose. Keep some of your edges loose, but not a planned loose. So know why you're doing it, and that will really just lift your artwork game up and just breathe a lot of life into it. So I'm just opening a new layer and clipping it onto the initial character drawing, and I'm adding in some red glow around the character. This is to show either, you know, some of the light, the backlight coming in from the sunset behind him, and to show some of the fiery, the heat, you know, coming from Nerja's powers. So as I talked about earlier, elements in the distance and far away should be kept simple. They could even just be, you know, the further away it is, like what I'm working on right now, it can be kept as just a one tone silhouette, you know, and that's basically just me trying to push more depth and just emphasize how far away some of those elements and objects are. They don't have to be much, they just have to be strong silhouettes, strong enough to be identifiable to what you're trying to create here. And once I'm done with that, I usually just go on top with a new layer and just add in some fogging. You know, I'll color pick from somewhere in the sky there and just set the opacity quite low and just brush over it. Right now I'm just adding in some trees into the midground here. I felt like there's a bit of empty space, so there was room for me to add something more. So right now I'm just adding in some trees, and note how even the direction of the tree is basically flowing towards the character as well. So when you're creating these things, think about the design, and you know, you just keep having that in mind, and then eventually it'll become second nature that you do this as a habit. So when you're designing your composition, it's always good to think about why you're adding something. Every element in your composition should serve a purpose. There should be a reason why it's there. And like I explained just earlier, the reason why I have these trees is because I'm trying to fill the empty space, because I felt like it was a bit too empty. And in doing so, it'll help me not only fill that space, but also create another element as a tool to draw the eye towards my centerpiece again. You can tell that I've been working on this for quite some time now, specifically those two trees, and I'm having some problems at the moment. I'm trying to find the right shape. I'm trying to find the right rhythm, the movement of the main tree trunk, and you can see that I'm struggling. And I just want to say, you know, sometimes well, most times actually, especially me, for example, there's always one certain part in every single artwork that I struggle with or I have problems with. You know, it could be a design problem, it could be a values issue, and you just know something's not working. But here, I spend a lot of time just keep asking myself, do I need this here? Is it right for it to be here? And I had in my mind, like it was mainly a gut feeling telling me that it's meant to be here. It's telling me that it belongs here. I just need to figure out the right method in, you know, positioning it or creating it. So, despite feeling like nothing's working, and I've been at this for quite some time, I just stuck to it. I stuck to my gut feeling and said, look, I'll just keep working at it. Eventually, I'm sure I'll find something. And that's exactly what I did. So I just kept pressing forward, and yeah, I just didn't give up on that gut feeling. I didn't give up on the idea. I really liked it. So this is just to tell you, especially if you're just starting off, if you feel like something isn't right, but you can't tell what it is, most times out of 10, your gut feeling is probably right. You might just need someone to give you a bit of a critique. You might need some fresh eyes, or you could just simply take a break and come back, and maybe that will help. So that's one of the things I did. I took a bit of a break. I went to the gym for a couple of hours, came back, and I started noticing what the issue was early on. So the problems for me at the time was more on the values side of things. Something about the values wasn't right. So I played around with fogging it out a little bit more, and just had the right amount of detail. Obviously these trees are a bit further away than the back mountains there, so it's going to have a little bit more detail. So as of now, I'm quite happy with the background. I'm happy with the background mountains, the midground, and the trees. So I'm happy to progress further from here. I'm adding a little bit more elements into the midground there, just to show some scale. And then I will be working on the water in the foreground and the two bigger rocks. So I'll just be working away on this, and I will be back shortly within the next few minutes. So I will go quiet, but I will be back to talk about what's next. Hello again, and I'm back. So right now I'm working on the water. I'm just adding in, reworking the highlights at the moment with that lighter blue. And I had a lot of fun creating the water in terms of just creating that little bit of sheen, that little bit of texture on there. And not having too much, just having a little bit of the surface glowing. And I think that gave it a really nice touch. So right now I'm adding in, I will be adding in a little bit more I want to add in some splashes, and I want to create some movement with it. So right now I'm just going to be adding in little speckles of water kind of just crashing against the surface of the rocks, and then I'll be adding in like a motion blur to it, and that will just create a lot of dramatic movement. It will create a lot of drama in your piece as well. You can see I'm adding some splashes into the ribbon, how the ribbon's kind of just slapping really quickly on the water. These things don't have to be too in your face. You know, you have them there, but they don't necessarily have to be so obstructive in your piece. In the next few minutes I'll just be working away on creating these splashes in the water, and just trying to find the right shapes, balance and direction. So I'll just be trying to get it right, playing with the opacity, playing with the values, making it a little bit darker here and there, making it a little bit brighter on the edges that's more open to the light. And yeah, I'm just trying to find the sweet spot here. We're almost there. We're doing the little bits now. Now we're up to the phase where we are adding in some finishing special effects just to lift the artwork and to finalize it. You can see that I've gone back to the initial layer where I created the light speckles. I've gotten rid of it, and I'm just recreating to fit the scale and depth. And I didn't want it to be so in your face. It was too visible before, so I'm just reworking it to make it a little bit softer. So you can do this by just creating the same textures and speckles, and then just giving it a bit of a Gaussian blur, just to soften the edges. And that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you guys really enjoyed listening to me talk about the breakdowns, the reasons why I added certain elements, and talk a lot about the design behind this. What I'm trying to do is get you guys to, really think about design and reasons to why you're doing what you're doing when you're creating your artwork. Like you'll probably have to keep reminding yourself when you're just starting out, or if it's not a habit that you're used to, and then eventually you can subconsciously be aware of these, and then that's how you become more efficient in your craft, right? So that's the purpose of why I talk about a lot of these things. So I hope you guys found this really helpful. Hope you found it really enjoyable. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.